Here's another story for you all. How are you all? I love my gentle readers. This story is another story about Mr. Leakey, the magician. It was written by JBS Haldane, who was a geneticist before the First World War. A meal with a magician. I have had some very odd meals in my time, and if I liked, I could tell you about a meal in a mine, or a meal in Moscow, or a meal with a millionaire. But I think you'll be more interested to hear about a meal I had one evening with a magician, because it's more unusual. People don't often have a meal of that sort, for rather few people know a magician at all well, because there aren't very many in England. Of course, I'm talking about real magicians. Some conjurers call themselves magicians, and they are very clever men, but they can't do the sort of things that real magicians do. I mean, a conjurer can turn a rabbit into a bowl of goldfish, but it's always done under cover or behind something so that you can't see just what is happening. But a real magician can turn a cow into a grandfather clock with people looking on all the time. Only it's very much harder work, and no one could do it twice a day, 6 days a week, like the conjurers do with rabbits. When I first met Mr. Leakey, I never guessed he was a magician. I met him like this. I was going across the Haymarket about 5 o'clock one afternoon. When I got to the refuge, by a lamp-post in the middle, I stopped, but a little man who had crossed so far with me went on. Then he saw a bus going down the hill and jumped back, which is always a silly thing to do. He jumped right in front of a car, and if I hadn't grabbed his overcoat collar and pulled him back onto the refuge, I think the car would have knocked him down. For it was wet weather, and the road was very greasy, so it only skidded when the driver put the brakes on. The little man was very grateful, but dreadfully frightened. So I gave him my arm across the street, and saw him back to his home, which was quite near. I won't tell you where it was, because if I did, you might go there and bother him, and if he got really grumpy, it might be very awkward indeed for you. I mean, he might make one of your ears as big as a cabbage leaf, or turn your hair green, or exchange your right and left feet, or something like that. Then everyone who saw you would burst out laughing and say, "Here comes Wonky Willie," or "Lopsided Lily," or whatever your name is. I think that would be very rude of them. "I can't bear modern traffic," he said. "The motor buses make me so frightened. If it wasn't for my work in London, I should like to live on a little island where there are no roads, or on the top of a mountain, or somewhere like that." The little man was sure I had saved his life, and insisted on my having dinner with him, so I said I'd come to dinner on Wednesday week. I didn't notice anything especially odd about him then, except that his ears were rather large, and that he had a little tuft of hair on the top of each of them, rather like the lynx at the zoo. I remember I thought if I had hair there, I would shave it off. He told me that his name was Leakey, and that he lived on the first floor. Can I just check, by the way? I am checking. Is this working? Yes, this is working. Is anyone watching? That's a different question. Right. Just wanted to make sure it was working. Right. Well, on Wednesday... Oh, hello, kid. On Wednesday week, I went to dinner with him. I went upstairs in a block of flats and knocked at quite an ordinary door, and the little hall of the flat was quite ordinary too. But when I got inside, it was one of the oddest rooms I have ever seen. Instead of wallpaper, there were curtains round it, embroidered with pictures of people and animals. There was a picture of two men building a house, and another of a man with a dog and a crossbow hunting rabbits. I know they were made of embroidery because I touched them, but it must have been a very funny sort of embroidery, because the pictures were always changing. As long as you looked at them, they stayed still, but if you looked away and back again, they had altered. During dinner, the builders had put a fresh story on the house. The hunter had shot a bird with his crossbow, and his dog had caught 2 rabbits. Yes, I'm wondering about the ear tufts as well. I don't know what it was about him that made him have ear tufts, but maybe it's important for a magician. Right. The furniture was very funny too. There was a bookcase made out of what looked like glass, with the largest books in it that I ever saw, none of them less than a foot high and bound in leather. There were cupboards running along the tops of the bookshelves. The chairs were beautifully carved with high wooden backs, and there were 2 tables. One was made of copper and had a huge crystal globe on it. The other was a solid lump of wood, about 10 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet high, with holes cut in it so that you could get your knees under it. There were various odd things hanging from the ceiling. At first, I couldn't make out how the room was lit. Then I saw that the light came from plants of a sort I had never seen before, growing in pots. They had red, yellow, and blue fruits about as big as tomatoes, which shone. They weren't disguised electric lamps, for I touched one and it was quite cold and soft like a fruit. "Well," said Mr. Leakey, "what would you like for dinner?" "Oh, whatever you've got," I said. "You can have whatever you like," he said. "Please choose a soup." So I thought he probably... Hang on a minute, I've lost my place. So I thought he probably got his dinner from a restaurant. I said, "I'll have borscht," which is a red Russian soup with cream in it. "Right," he said, "I'll get it ready. Look, do you mind if we have dinner served the way mine usually is? You aren't easily frightened, are you?" "Not very easily," I said. "All right then, I'll call my servant, but I warn you, he is rather odd." At that, Mr. Leakey flapped the tops and lobes of his ears against his head. It made a noise like when one claps one's hands, but not so loud. Out of a large copper pot, about as big as the copper you wash clothes in, which was standing in one corner, came what at first I thought was a large, wet snake. Then I saw it had suckers all down one side and was really the arm of an octopus. This arm opened a cupboard and pulled out a large towel with which it wiped the next arm that came out. The dry arm then clung onto the wall with its suckers, and gradually the whole beast came out, dried itself, and crawled up the wall. It was the biggest octopus I have ever seen. Each arm was about 8 feet long, and its body was as big as a sack. It crawled up the wall, and then along the ceiling, holding on by its suckers like a fly. When it got above the table, it held on by one arm only, and with the other 7 got plates and knives and forks out of the cupboards above the bookshelves and laid the table with them. "That's my servant Oliver," said Mr. Leakey. "He's much better than a person, because he has more arms to work with, and he can hold on to a plate with about 10 suckers, so he never drops one." When Oliver the octopus was at the table, we sat down, and he offered me a choice of water, lemonade, beer, and 4 different kinds of wine, with his 7 free arms, each of which held a different bottle. I chose some water and some very good red wine from Burgundy. All this was so odd, I was not surprised to notice that my host was wearing a top hat. But I certainly did think it a little queer when he took it off and poured 2 platefuls of soup out of it. "I agree, Kit. Limbs is very important." "Ah, we want some cream," he added. "Come here, Phyllis." At this, a small green cow, about the size of a rabbit, ran out of a hutch, jumped onto the table, and stood in front of Mr. Leakey, who milked her into a silver cream jug, which Oliver had handed down for the purpose. The cream was excellent, and I enjoyed the soup very much. What would you like next? Said Mr. Leakey. I leave it to you, I answered. All right, he said. We'll have grilled turbot and turkey to follow. Catch us a turbot, please, Oliver, and be ready to grill it, Pompey. At this, Oliver picked up a fish hook with the end of one of his arms and began making casts in the air like a fly fisher. Meanwhile, I heard a noise in the fireplace, and Pompey came out. He was a small dragon, about a foot long, not counting his tail, which measured another foot. He had been lying on the burning coals and was red hot. So I was glad to see that as soon as he got out of the fire, he put on a pair of asbestos boots, which were lying in the fender, onto his hind feet. Now, Pompey, said Mr. Leakey, hold up your tail properly. If you burn the carpet again, I'll pour a bucket of cold water over you. Of course, I wouldn't really do that. It's very cruel to pour cold water on a dragon, especially a little one with a thin skin, he added in a low voice which only I could hear. But poor Pompey took the threat quite seriously. He whimpered, and the yellow flames which were coming out of his nose turned a dull blue. He waddled along rather clumsily on his hind legs, holding up his tail and the front part of his body. I think the asbestos boots made walking quite difficult too. Yeah, rather difficult for him, though they saved the carpet, and no doubt kept his hind feet warm. But, of course, dragons generally walk on all 4 feet and seldom wear boots, so I was surprised that Pompey walked as well as he did. I was so busy watching Pompey that I never saw how Oliver caught the turbot, and by the time I looked up at him, he'd just finished cleaning it, and threw it down to Pompey. Pompey caught it in his front paws, which had cooled down a bit, and were just about the right temperature for grilling things. He had long, thin fingers with claws on the ends, and held the fish on each hand alternately, holding the other against his red-hot chest to warm it. By the time he'd finished and put the grilled fish onto a plate, which Oliver handed down, Pompey was clearly feeling the cold, for his teeth were chattering, and he scampered back to the fire with evident joy. Yes, said Mr. Leakey, I know some people say it's cruel to let a young dragon cool down like that, and liable to give it a bad cold. But I say a dragon can't begin to learn too soon that life isn't all fire and flames, and the world is a colder place than he'd like it to be. And they don't get cold if you give them plenty of sulphur to eat. Of course, a dragon with a cold is an awful nuisance to itself and everyone else. I've known one throw flames for 100 yards when it sneezed. But that was a full-grown one, of course. It burned down one of the Emperor of China's palaces. Besides, I really couldn't afford to keep a dragon if I didn't make use of him. Last week, for example, I used his breath to burn the old paint off the door, and his tail makes quite a good soldering iron. Then he's really much more reliable than a dog for dealing with burglars. They might shoot a dog, but leaden bullets just melt the moment they touch Pompey. Anyway, I think dragons were meant for use, not ornament. Don't you? Well, do you know, I answered, I'm ashamed to say that Pompey is the first live dragon that I've ever seen. Oh, of course, said Mr. Leakey. How stupid of me. I have so few guests here, except professional colleagues, that I forgot you were a layman. By the way, he went on, as he poured sauce out of his hat over the fish, I don't know if you've noticed anything strange about this dinner. Of course, some people are more observant than others. Well, I said, I have never seen anything like it before. For example, at that moment, I was admiring an enormous rainbow-coloured beetle, which was crawling towards me over the table with the salt cellar strapped on its back. Ah, well then, said my host, perhaps you have guessed that I'm a magician. Pompey, of course, is a real dragon, but most of the other animals here were people before I made them what they are now. Take Oliver, for example. When he was a man, he had his legs cut off by a railway train. I couldn't stick them on again, because my magic doesn't work against machinery. Poor Oliver was bleeding to death, so I thought the only way to save his life was to turn him into some animal with no legs. Then he wouldn't have any legs to have been cut off. I turned him into a snail, and took him home in my pocket. But whenever I tried to turn him back into something more interesting, like a dog, it had no hind legs. But an octopus has really got no legs. Those 8 tentacles grow out of its head. So when I turned him into an octopus, he was all right. And he'd been a waiter when he was a man, so he soon learned his job. I think he's much better than a maid, because he can lift the plates from above, and doesn't stand behind one and breathe down one's neck. You may have the rest of the fish, Oliver, and a bottle of beer. I know that's what you like. Oliver seized the fish in one of his arms and put it into an immense beak, like a parrot's, but much bigger, which lay in the centre of the 8 arms. Then he took a bottle of beer out of a cupboard, unscrewed the cork with his beak, hoisted himself up to the ceiling with 2 of his other arms, and turned over so that his mouth was upwards. As he emptied with the bottle, he winked one of his enormous eyes. Then I felt sure he must really be a man, for I never saw an ordinary octopus wink. Graham. The turkey came in a more ordinary way. Oliver let down a large hot plate, and then a dish cover onto it. There was nothing in the cover, as I could see. Mr. Leakey got up, took a large wand out of his umbrella stand, pointed it at the dish cover, said a few words, and there was the turkey, steaming hot, when Oliver lifted the cover off it. Of course, that's easy, said Mr. Leakey. Any good conjurer could do it. But you can never be sure the food you get in that way is absolutely fresh. That's why I like to see my fish caught. But birds are all the better for being a few days old. Ah, we want some sausages too. That's easy. He took a small clay pipe out of his pocket and blew into it. A large brown bubble came out of the other end, shaped like a sausage. Oliver picked it off with the end of one of his tentacles and put it on a hot plate. And it was a sausage, because I ate it. He made 6 sausages in this way, and while I was watching him, Oliver had handed down the vegetables. I don't know where he got them. The sauce and gravy came out of Mr. Leakey's hat, as usual. Right, that is half the story. And because it's a long story, I'm going to leave it for tonight, and you can hear the rest tomorrow. I hope you have enjoyed it. I will see you people tomorrow. Sleep well.